Today we have a very exciting package to unbox. So over the past few years, I've been able to collect every color of the iPhone 5C running its original software version iOS 7 except for one. And ironically enough, that has been the white color. So I finally found this one on eBay. It was $25.99 plus shipping. According to the IMEI number on this, the device itself has never been activated. It's supposed to be a 32GB model that was produced in July of 2013. So if all goes well here, we should be running iOS 7.0. Let's go ahead and get it opened up. And interesting, okay, the first thing we see here is a Samsung power adapter with about the shortest lightning cable I've ever seen. But here we can see the white iPhone 5C itself. I am noticing that it is missing the SIM card tray. And the back panel here is looking a little bit smudged up, but in really good condition. Turning the device over here to the front, we will see that there is some dirt around the edges. I'm assuming this is just from storage because again, the device reports as never being activated. And the display itself is looking a little bit smudged up as well, but probably perfect underneath. Let's see if it has any battery power. And nice, we boot right into the slide to set up screen. From this, we can tell the device is either running iOS 7 or 8 by the font. This font is known as Helvetica Neue, and one of the ways you can spot that is by the curled tail on the letter A. As when Apple switched to San Francisco in iOS 9, that tail became flat. Another thing to look for is how close the tail of the E kind of meets back around. It's very subtle, but that entrance was just widened with iOS 9. But let's go ahead and slide to set up now. Okay, it looks like we have made it through the activation process. I wasn't sure if I would need to get a SIM card where the tray here is missing. And there we go, we see the iOS 7 home screen. And this is just so nice to see. We get the default wallpaper that was meant for this white colored device. Of course, we have the passbook icon with 3 rows that was exclusive to iOS 7. Starting with iOS 8, that icon got 4 rows. But we also get a really good sign here that this is an early version of iOS 7. And that is the slightly brighter color for the phone, messages, and FaceTime icon here. These were changed to a darker shade of green with iOS 7.1. But let's jump into settings to see exactly what version of iOS 7 we have. And awesome, we see iOS 7.0 and confirmation of the 32GB capacity. So this is absolutely incredible. I thought this would be on 7.0 with that July 2013 production date. But that's not necessarily a foolproof way to say, oh, this device is for sure running this version. Because theoretically, someone could have updated it but not activated it. But man, I'm just over the moon to finally have one of these running iOS 7 in the white color. I know it's really ironic that I've been able to find every other color with iOS 7 except for white, as in general the white color is really common. So this is just a really surreal moment for me. I'm going to take a second to get the device all cleaned up and then we can take a closer look at it. Alright, well, I've gotten the iPhone 5C all set up how I like. So I got some apps and games downloaded as well as some music synced. I actually made a playlist of 2013 songs that remind me of the era when this device came out. But for now, let's take a second to just talk about what the iPhone 5C was. This model came out in September 2013 alongside the iPhone 5S. Which that was really significant because it was the first time Apple was releasing 2 new iPhones at once. However, new was a little bit of an ironic term for the 5C here. Really, this iPhone was the previous year's iPhone 5 just in a new plastic housing. So pretty much the exact same hardware going on between these two. It was just that the plastic design of the 5C was not nearly as desirable as the gorgeous aluminum design on the iPhone 5. The iPhone 5S did carry on with the more premium design, and it only carried a $100 price premium here over the 5C. But it wasn't like you were just choosing a design between these two. The 5S also went on to provide a ton of upgrades. So you had the all-new Touch ID fingerprint sensor on the home button. You also had an improved rear-facing camera with a new slow-mo video feature. Plus, inside the 5S was powered by the all-new A7 chip. The A7 was actually the first 64-bit mobile processor, and by the numbers it was around 2 times as fast as the A6. So as you can see, you were making a ton of compromises to go for the 5C. And many people do find the 5C to be one of the worst iPhones ever made. The plastic design here was something we hadn't seen since the 2009 iPhone 3GS. It at least did not have the tendency to crack like the 3G and 3GS models did. It just felt like a really strange step backward for Apple. One obvious advantage of the plastic though was the ability to do really fun colors. So there were 5 to pick from: yellow, blue, white, green, and pink. I was around 12 years old when the iPhone 5C came out, and I remember thinking it was a really cool device. I thought all of the color options were really nice. It was a big change from only having the choice between black and white. At the same time these came out, the iPhone 5S launched with a gold color option. Even the packaging for the iPhone 5C was unique. So it had a plastic box here that was kind of reminiscent of iPod Touch boxes. You would lift off the top here and it would reveal the device kind of floating in a tray. There was a sticker on the front here with an image of the home screen. And of course this was from an era where Apple was still including a really nice selection of accessories. So your lightning cable, power adapter, as well as earpods with this really nice plastic carrying case. These were pretty much the design that the original AirPods had, so they were very comfortable in the ear. And they included the nice microphone and remote. 2013 just felt like a huge year of changes for Apple. Not only on the hardware side, but also in software, because they just launched iOS 7, which changed pretty much everything from iOS 6. So the design philosophy here was totally different from what we had before in the Steve Jobs era. Now everything in the UI had a very flat and modern look with translucent elements. That was pretty much the polar opposite from what we had with iOS 6 and older. With those versions, the design philosophy was known as skeuomorphism, where all of these elements kind of mimic real-life objects. So take, for example, the compass application. Here on iOS 6, you have a real compass image and a wooden background. But with iOS 7, it was a completely different minimal look. Also gone was the linen style background that was used in a lot of places across iOS 6. iOS 7 had these translucent style folders and just a simple transparent notification center. Also, iOS 7 had some functional differences, so the multitasking interface was completely different. You now had full screen previews of the applications, and closing them out was as simple as swiping up. With iOS 6, you only had a preview of the app icons, and closing them out was a two-step process. Another big upgrade for iOS 7 was the addition of a control center. This was just not available on iOS 6, although there were some limited controls to the left of the multitasking interface. It was so nice how on iOS 7 you could easily change your device's brightness this way. Before on iOS 6, that involved going all the way into settings and then into this menu. It was also really nice to have an integrated flashlight on iOS 7, because on iOS 6 you needed to download a separate app from the App Store to get one of those. And iOS 7 just felt so fitting here on the iPhone 5C. All of the bright neon colors in the UI just really looked nice with the device. Let's take a look at the default wallpapers here for iOS 7. I think these are absolutely legendary. There were only around 4 or 5 carried over from iOS 6. There are some options down here near the bottom that were meant for the 5C models. So one for each color that the device shipped in, plus a black option. These kind of had like a gradient design with dots. But aside from these, there are some even more nostalgic choices. So we have 3 space images here at the top. This one here was the default on every other device running this version. I just love the iOS 7 wallpaper selection. I really think each of these looks incredible in its own way. I've always thought this image looked especially nice. Also these flowers, as well as some of the more abstract choices down here near the bottom. And this wood texture here was really cool. I think for this device specifically, I will probably just leave the white default image. A big part of the home and lock screen on iOS 7 was something known as parallax. That's an effect that would move the icons and wallpaper to create a 3D or like floating effect. It's kind of hard to convey through camera, and especially with this wallpaper. But maybe it will be a little bit more clear on the lock screen here. And I don't think it's really coming across, so maybe we should change the wallpaper. Let's go with that wooden image I liked. Yeah, I think the 3D effect is a little bit more clear now. So that was just really cool to play around with on iOS 7. I remember iOS 7 was a little bit controversial back in the day. Some people really loved it and some people totally hated it. I think iOS 6 and older will always have a really nostalgic place in most people's hearts. But at least for me, I enjoy both of these versions pretty much the same. Something that has always surprised me between these two is the fact that Passbook looks almost the same on iOS 6 as it does on iOS 7. I think this only applies to iOS 6.1 and newer, but take a look between these two versions. So definitely a really similar look, which cannot be said for most of the other features on the UI. Also in the Music app, the cover flow feature was completely different. So as you can see on iOS 7, you were viewing a lot more albums at once. And you could even pinch in or out on this one. But between these two, I think I definitely prefer the iOS 6 cover flow. We'll take a look at some of the apps I have here. So I have some old social media apps. Check out that old Snapchat logo. Most of these I have are actually not optimized for iOS 7 yet. So when you go into something that pulls up a keyboard, you will actually see that it's the iOS 6 keyboard. So that looks really strange here on a device that never shipped with iOS 6. Also, some of these apps had not yet been optimized for the 4-inch display on the iPhone 5 and newer. So you'll see these black bars on the top and bottom. But this is just kind of a sampling of the apps that I like to use on these older devices. For me personally, I just like having these for the nostalgia factor. You could get the iPhone 5C with 16 or 32 gigabytes of storage like I have here. And those capacities were priced at $549 or $649. So again, just $100 cheaper than the flagship iPhone 5S. And it meant that the 32 gigabyte 5C here was the same price as a 16 gigabyte 5S. So yeah, just a really bad value proposition. And that was made especially clear when you thought about the longevity of the device. So the 5C here expectedly received the same amount of software support as the iPhone 5. That was through iOS 10 in 2016, while the iPhone 5S received 2 more versions through iOS 12 in 2018. Another nail in the coffin for the iPhone 5C was the fact that Apple made a base model in 2014 that only had 8 gigabytes of storage. Obviously, that was an absolutely abysmal amount, and I would know because I happened to own one of those back then. So I'll go ahead and pull out my 8 gigabyte 5C here. These shipped with iOS 8. And we'll jump here into settings to see that the software took up so much of that 8 gigabytes, you only had 5.4 to work with. On this one, it looks like I have 20 apps installed and there is only 3 gigabytes left to work with. So just imagine using one of these on iOS 9 or 10, it became absolutely unusable. This was also just an era where iPhones were advancing really quickly year over year, not only in their power, but in their design. So in 2014, we got the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, which just looked totally different from the 5C here. But yeah, as you can see, the iPhone 5C just had a lot of things going against it, and that's why most people find this to be the worst iPhone ever made. The iPhone 5C had some really interesting accessories launched with it. So we had this silicone case here with dots in it. This kind of reminds me of a Connect 4 game. And obviously it's just a really weird decision to have holes in a phone case. Plus different oddities here like the Apple logo being centered with this top portion rather than being in line where the logo actually is on the device. And who can forget the fact that the holes here covering the iPhone text creates the word non. But as weird as they are, these cases were fun to play around with all the colors. There were just so many combinations that you could create. Over here you'll see that I have a yellow 5C in a white case. These cases were offered in every color the device shipped in with the addition of a black option. I also wanted to touch on more of those differences between the 7.0 versions and the 7.1 versions of iOS 7. So I'll bring in my iPhone 5S here. This one is running 7.1.2, but all of these changes here apply to 7.1 and newer. So first off, between these, the animations are quite different. Even when just waking the device from sleep, you'll notice that 7.0 is quite a bit slower. Also, when opening the control center, you will notice that on 7.1 it comes up and kind of bounces. But on 7.0 it just kind of slowly wafts upward. Plus, as I mentioned before, there is a difference between the phone, messages, and FaceTime icons with that green color. The slide to power off indicators were completely different as well. So rectangular here on 7.0 and rounded on 7.1. This type of design cue also carries over to applications like phone. So the call button here on 7.1 is rounded but rectangular on 7.0. And there were quite a few more differences like that between these two. It was definitely strange to have so many differences within one iOS version like this. But yeah, that pretty much concludes my look at this iPhone 5C running iOS 7.0. This was definitely one of the craziest finds I've had in a while. I forgot to mention this at the beginning of the video, but the device was actually listed as an 8GB model on eBay. And only from checking the IMEI number did I find out that it was actually a 32GB model and never activated. So I guess that just goes to show that it pays off to check every listing on eBay as they come up. And by the way, I did order a SIM card tray for this device. But be sure to leave me a comment below with your thoughts on the iPhone 5C as well as iOS 7. I know this is quite a polarizing version for how much it changed. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.